They were promised the world. Literally. Their parents told them, go to college, get the degree, work hard, and everything will fall into place. Teachers said it, guidance counselors said it, every graduation speech they ever heard said it. So they did. They followed the script, they checked every box, and then they walked out into the real world and found nothing. A recession, a broken job market, debt that would follow them for decades, and a society that looked at them and said, why are you struggling? What's wrong with you? Millennials. Born between 1981 and 1996, the most educated, most indebted, and most psychologically betrayed generation in modern history. And the label everyone keeps using, the lost generation, is far more accurate than most people realize. Now let's get something out of the way immediately. This is not a video about avocado toast. It's not about participation trophies. And it's not about how millennials killed the napkin industry or whatever headline you saw last week. What this video is about is the specific psychological conditions that shaped an entire generation's brain during the most critical years of development, and why those conditions created patterns that are still playing out today in their careers, their relationships, and their mental health. Because once you see what actually happened to millennials, the stereotypes don't just fall apart, they become insulting. Point number 4 is the one that will hit the hardest, especially if you're a millennial yourself. It's the wound nobody talks about because nobody knows how to name it. To understand millennials, you have to understand the deal they were offered, and more importantly, you have to understand that the deal was a lie. Millennials were raised during one of the longest economic expansions in American history. The 1990s felt stable, optimistic, almost invincible. Their boomer parents, who had benefited enormously from post-war prosperity, passed down a simple belief. Education equals success. Get the degree. The rest will follow. So millennials went to college in record numbers. They took out loans they were told were good debt. They picked majors their parents approved of. They did everything right. And then the 2008 financial crisis hit like a sledgehammer. Suddenly, the job market collapsed. Entry-level positions vanished. The ones that remained required 3 years of experience for an unpaid internship. And the degree that was supposed to be a golden ticket? It was now a receipt for $100,000 in debt with no return policy. Psychologists have a term for this: expectation violation. It's what happens when reality dramatically contradicts what you were conditioned to believe. And the intensity of the psychological damage is proportional to how deeply you believe the original promise. Millennials didn't just believe it. They built their entire identity around it. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Millennials didn't just grow up in a prosperous economy. They grew up in the most structured, supervised, and performance-tracked childhood in history. They were the first generation of organized play dates instead of unsupervised play. The first generation where every sport had a trophy. The first generation where parents attended every practice, every recital, every event, not because the kids needed it, but because parenting had become a competitive performance in itself. Psychologist Madeline Levine calls this the pressure of privilege. The children of boomer parents weren't neglected. They were over-optimized. Every moment was structured toward achievement, and the implicit message was clear. Your worth is tied to your output. This created a generation that is extraordinarily good at performing, at jobs, at social media, at looking like they have it together. But underneath that performance, chronic self-doubt. Because when your entire childhood was about meeting external benchmarks, you never developed an internal sense of enough. Millennials don't procrastinate because they're lazy. Many of them procrastinate because they're terrified of producing something that isn't perfect. And that terror was installed in childhood, one gold star at a time. Gen Z gets called the digital natives, but here's the thing. Millennials were the actual test subjects. They're the ones who built their first social identities on MySpace and LiveJournal, who navigated early Facebook when there were no rules, no algorithms, and no understanding of what broadcasting your life to hundreds of people would do to your brain. They were the first to experience cyberbullying before anyone had a name for it. The first to feel the dopamine loop of likes before a single study had been published about social media and mental health. Every warning that Gen Z received, every parental control, every screen time limit, every digital literacy class, all of it was built on data gathered from millennials. They were the experiment, the control group that nobody told they were in an experiment. And the psychological cost was enormous. Millennials developed their sense of self during the exact years when social media was rewriting the rules of identity. They learned to compare in real time, to curate in real time, to perform happiness in real time. And because there was no precedent, there was no pushback. No one told them it was unhealthy. Because no one knew yet. By the time the research caught up, the damage was already structural. This is the one I mentioned at the beginning, and if you're a millennial, this might be the hardest part of this video to hear. Every culture has milestones that signal adulthood. Buying a home, getting married, having children, starting a career that feels permanent. These aren't just life events. Psychologically, they're identity anchors. They tell your brain, you've arrived, you're an adult, you belong in the adult world now. Millennials have been systematically locked out of almost every single one of these milestones. Homeownership is out of reach for most. Marriage is delayed, not by choice, but by financial reality. Children are postponed because the math doesn't work. And career stability, in the gig economy, with layoffs every quarter, the psychological result is something researchers call emerging adulthood, a prolonged phase of identity exploration that was supposed to end in your mid-20s. For millennials, it never ended. They're in their 30s and 40s, still feeling like they're waiting for real life to start. And this is the wound nobody names. It's not sadness. It's not anger. It's a persistent, quiet sense of being behind, of watching the clock and knowing you're not where you were supposed to be. Not because you failed, but because the timeline you were given was fiction. The cruelest part? They blame themselves, because that's what the performance generation does. When the system fails you and your whole identity is built on achievement, the only explanation your brain accepts is, I must not have been good enough. And now, the part that doesn't make headlines, because it's not dramatic enough for a news cycle, but it's the most important thing happening in this generation right now. Millennials are quietly reinventing what a meaningful life looks like. They can't follow the boomer script. The milestones are gone. The social contract is shredded. The career ladder has missing rungs, so instead of climbing a broken structure, they're building sideways. They're creating careers out of patchwork, freelancing, consulting, side projects, content creation, portfolio careers that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. They're redefining family on their own terms, chosen families, co-parenting arrangements, intentional communities. They're prioritizing mental health not as a trend, but as a survival mechanism they wish they'd had 10 years earlier. And most importantly, they're doing all of this while carrying more economic weight than any young generation in decades. Student debt, stagnant wages, housing costs that eat 60% of their income. They're not thriving by traditional metrics, but they're adapting with a creativity and resilience that gets zero recognition because it doesn't look like success the way their parents defined it. They're not the lost generation. They're the generation that was given a broken map and decided to navigate without one. So the next time someone calls millennials lazy, entitled, or lost, remember what you heard today. Remember the promise that was broken, the identity that was built on performance, the digital experiment nobody consented to, the milestones that were stolen, and the quiet reinvention happening underneath all the noise. They're not lost. They're just building something that doesn't have a name yet. And maybe that's exactly the point. If you're a millennial, tell me in the comments, which point hit closest to home? And if you're not, did this change how you see the millennials in your life? We've already covered baby boomers, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha in this series. Links in the description. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.